The morning air carried the bite of autumn as Staff Sergeant Reina Alvaro approached the reinforced steel gates of the Naval Intelligence Facility. Her Marine Corps uniform was immaculate, pressed to regulation perfection, the eagle, globe, and anchor gleaming on her cover. She had been making this walk for 6 months now, ever since her transfer to intelligence analysis, and every morning brought the same ritual of dismissal. Burke Hadley stood at the security checkpoint, his broad frame blocking the pedestrian entrance. He wore the dark blue uniform of Sentinel Security Solutions, a private contractor firm that handled facility protection. Former Army military police, Burke never missed an opportunity to remind people of his service, though his discharge had come under circumstances he preferred not to discuss. "Good morning," Reina said, presenting her credentials. Burke took the ID card, studying it with exaggerated slowness. His partner, Trent Voss, leaned against the scanning station, a smirk playing at his lips. "Staff Sergeant." "Huh," Burke said, dragging out each syllable. "Must be nice, pushing papers in that clean uniform. Bet you never got a speck of dirt on it." Reina kept her expression neutral, her dark eyes steady. She had learned long ago that silence often spoke louder than words. The ID scanner beeped its approval, but Burke held on her card a moment longer. "You know, we got a real inspection coming up," Trent added, straightening up. "SEAL's going to be crawling all over this place. Probably never seen real operators before. Have you?" "Just doing my job," Reina replied evenly, extending her hand for her credentials. Burke finally released the card, but Wade Kimball, the third member of their security team, had appeared from the guard shack. He was younger than the other two, still carrying the eagerness of someone trying to prove himself. "Des Marines," Wade said with a laugh. "I always wondered what you guys actually do all day. File reports? Make coffee?" The three contractors shared a laugh, their voices echoing off the concrete barriers that surrounded the facility entrance. Reina clipped her ID back onto her uniform and moved toward the inner gate, her steps measured and purposeful. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the whispered comments that followed her like shadows. Inside the facility, the hallways gleamed under fluorescent lighting. Reina made her way to the intelligence section, a secured area on the 3rd floor that required additional clearance. She passed young Marines who nodded respectfully, their acknowledgement genuine even if they did not know her full story. Her office was small but efficient, filled with classified documents and secure computer terminals that hummed quietly in the climate-controlled space. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne stopped by her desk mid-morning, a folder tucked under his arm. He was career intelligence, a man who understood the value of quiet competence. "How are we looking on the regional threat assessment?" he asked. "Nearly complete, sir," Reina replied, pulling up her analysis on the screen. "I have identified 3 emerging patterns in the maritime surveillance data that warrant attention." Thorne leaned in, studying her work with an approving nod. "Excellent work, Staff Sergeant. The SEAL team inspection tomorrow will need this briefing packet. I'm counting on you." "Yes, sir," Reina said. "Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Perhaps you have encountered different attitudes towards service members in your area, or maybe you have seen how respect can be earned in unexpected ways." As Thorne left, Reina returned to her analysis, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The scars on her hands caught the light, thin white lines that traced across her knuckles and palm. They were old now, barely noticeable unless someone looked closely, but they told stories she no longer shared. Lunch came and went at her desk, a habit born from years of operational tempo, where meals were taken when time allowed. She was deep in cross-referencing intelligence reports when her phone buzzed with a message requiring her presence at the security checkpoint. A delivery had arrived that needed her signature. The walk back down to the front gate felt longer than usual. Burke and his team were there. As always, their presence a constant reminder of the divide between those who had served in combat roles and those who assumed they knew what that meant. "Got a package for you," Burke said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Must be important," all that classified tape wrapped around it. Reina signed for the delivery, noting how Burke made a show of checking her signature against her ID, as if she might be an imposter. "You know what I think?" Wade said, leaning against the counter. "I think they put you here because you could not hack it in the real Marine Corps. This is where they stick the ones who wash out." Trent laughed, nodding in agreement. "Desk duty. Safe and sound while real warriors do the actual work." Reyna tucked the package under her arm, her expression unchanged. She had heard worse, had faced greater challenges than the petty mockery of men who measured their worth in volume rather than substance. But as she walked away, there was something in her bearing, a precision to her movement that spoke of training deeper than they could recognize. Her situational awareness never faltered. She noted the angles of the hallway, the positions of security cameras, the exits and entry points with an instinct that had been honed in places far more dangerous than this sterile facility. Back in her office, Reyna opened the package to find updated satellite imagery and signals intelligence reports. She worked through the afternoon, building a comprehensive brief that would give the incoming SEAL team everything they needed to understand the current threat environment. It was meticulous work, demanding attention to detail and an understanding of operational requirements that came from experience. As the day ended and she prepared to leave, Reyna paused at her window. The facility spread out below, its security protocols and daily rhythms as familiar to her now as any forward operating base had been. She thought about tomorrow, about the SEAL team inspection, about the inevitable moment when Burke would try to posture and prove himself in front of real operators. She thought about all of this, and she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Tomorrow would be interesting. The week unfolded with a predictable rhythm of disrespect. Each morning brought the same gauntlet at the security checkpoint. Burke and his team finding new ways to diminish her presence. By Wednesday, their comments had grown bolder, their laughter louder. "Playing dress-up again," Burke said as Reyna arrived for her shift. "That uniform looks good on you. Real clean. Not a single combat patch. Not a single deployment indicator. Makes you wonder what you actually did to earn those stripes." Wade stood nearby, arms crossed, nodding along. "My cousin is a real Marine. Infantry. He would laugh if he saw you calling yourself a warrior." Reyna accepted her credentials back without comment. But Trent blocked her path deliberately, forcing her to step around him. The power play was juvenile, but it served their need to feel superior. She moved past them with the same calm she had maintained all week, her face betraying nothing of the calculation happening behind her eyes. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne noticed the tension during their morning brief. He set down his coffee cup and studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The contractors giving you trouble, Staff Sergeant?" he asked. "Nothing I cannot handle, sir," Reyna replied. Thorne nodded slowly. "Your work here has been exemplary. The threat assessment you completed yesterday was one of the best analyses I have seen in my 20 years of intelligence work. Do not let anyone make you question your value." "Thank you, sir," Reyna said, and she meant it. Thorne was one of the few who understood that strength came in many forms, that intelligence work required its own kind of courage. The facility buzzed with preparation for the upcoming SEAL team inspection. It was scheduled for the following week, but that afternoon, the timeline accelerated. Thorne appeared at her office door with news that changed everything. "The inspection has been moved up to Friday," he said. 2 days from now. The SEAL team is wrapping up an exercise early and wants to complete their facility assessments ahead of schedule. Reyna felt something shift in her chest, a stirring of anticipation she had not experienced in months. "Friday. 2 days. I will have the briefing materials ready, sir," she said. "I know you will," Thorne replied. The SEALs specifically requested someone with operational intelligence experience to present the brief. "You are exactly who they need." After he left, Reyna sat quietly at her desk, her fingers resting on the keyboard. Operational intelligence experience. The phrase carried weight that Thorne understood but could not fully explain to others. Her screen displayed classified threat matrices and enemy movement patterns, the kind of analysis that required more than academic training. It required having been there, having seen how intelligence translated to life and death decisions in real time. That evening, as she worked late preparing the briefing packets, Burke and his team made their final rounds before shift change. They stopped at her office window, peering in through the glass partition. "Still here?" Burke called out, his voice muffled but audible. "Burning the midnight oil. Or just trying to look important." Raina did not look up from her work. She had learned in harder schools than this that attention was fuel for bullies. Deprive them of it, and they eventually moved on. But Burke was persistent. "You hear about the SEALs coming," he said to his team, but loud enough for her to hear. "Real operators. I served with some special operations guys back in my MP days. They respect people who have actually been in the fight. Not paper pushers." Wade laughed. "Maybe we should ask them to evaluate our staff sergeant here. See what real warriors think about desk duty." Trent joined in. "I bet $20 she does not last 5 minutes in a conversation with them. They will see right through her." Burke nodded enthusiastically. "I will take that bet. In fact, I guarantee you the SEALs will be more interested in talking to us about real security protocols than listening to her read from note cards." Their laughter echoed down the hallway as they left. Raina finally looked up, watching their retreating forms through the glass. Her hands, those scarred hands that had steadied weapons and dragged wounded teammates to safety, rested flat on her desk. She flexed her fingers once, feeling the tightness of old tissue beneath the skin. Thursday morning arrived with a cold rain that drummed against the facility windows. Raina dressed with extra care, her uniform perfect in every detail. At the checkpoint, Burke was waiting with a triumphant grin. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "SEALs will be here first thing. Hope you're ready for them to see what real military professionals look like." "I'm sure it will be educational," Raina replied evenly. Burke laughed. "Educational. That is one word for it. They're going to wonder why a Marine is stuck doing intelligence work. Usually, that means you could not cut it in a real MOS." Trent appeared with a clipboard. "We have been reviewing security protocols all week. Burke here is going to brief the SEAL team on our procedures. Show them how we keep this place locked down." Wade added his contribution. "Maybe you can make copies of the handouts. Contribute in your own way." The mockery continued through the day, building toward tomorrow's confrontation. Other facility personnel had begun to notice the dynamic, the way Burke's team treated the Marine staff sergeant with open contempt. Some of the younger Marines looked uncomfortable with it, but none had the rank or authority to intervene. By late afternoon, Raina had completed her briefing preparation. The packets were comprehensive, each page reflecting hours of analysis and synthesis. She had included threat assessments, pattern analysis, and tactical recommendations that drew from a depth of experience the SEALs would recognize immediately, if they had the clearance to understand where that experience came from. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne reviewed her work with undisguised approval. "Outstanding, Staff Sergeant. This is exactly what they need. You have a gift for translating raw intelligence into actionable operational guidance." "Just connecting the dots, sir," Raina said. Thorne smiled slightly. "Some people spend careers learning to connect those particular dots. You make it look natural." After he left, Raina allowed herself a moment to remember. Memories she usually kept locked away, stored in the same classified vault as her service record. She remembered nights in hostile territory, calling in close air support while rounds cracked overhead. She remembered the weight of decisions made in seconds, the responsibility of lives, depending on her analysis, being correct. She remembered earning a call sign that had become legend in certain circles, a name whispered with respect by those who operated in the darkest corners of the world. But that was before the shrapnel, before the medical evaluation, before the forced transition to a role where her mind could still serve even if her body could not endure the physical demands of forced reconnaissance operations. The facility emptied as evening came. Raina secured her workspace and made her way to the exit. Burke was there, as always, ready with his final jab of the day. "Get some rest tonight," he said with mock concern. "Tomorrow is going to be a big day for you. Try not to embarrass yourself in front of real operators." Raina met his eyes for just a moment, and something in her gaze made him falter. It was brief, barely noticeable, but for an instant Burke saw something that did not fit his narrative of the desk Marine who had never seen action. Then the moment passed. Reyna walked through the gate and into the evening rain, leaving Burke to his assumptions and his pride. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, 6 Navy SEALs who knew exactly who she was and what she had done in places that would never appear in official records. Tomorrow, everything would change. Friday morning broke clear and cold, the storm having passed during the night. Reyna arrived at the facility an hour before her normal shift, carrying the briefing materials in a secure transport case. The parking lot was already filling with vehicles, the anticipation of the SEAL team inspection creating an unusual energy throughout the compound. At the checkpoint, Burke stood with his team, all 3 wearing their most official demeanor. They had clearly spent extra time on their appearance, uniforms crisp and equipment positioned for maximum impression. Burke was reviewing a clipboard with exaggerated importance when Reyna approached. Well, the star of the show, Burke announced. Ready for your big presentation? Hope you memorized your lines. The briefing materials are prepared to standard, Reyna replied, presenting her credentials. Trent stepped forward, his inspection of her identification more thorough than usual. You know, these SEAL guys are going to ask questions. Real operational questions. What are you going to do when you cannot just read from your notes? Wade chimed in with his contribution. My money is still on her freezing up. SEALs do not have patience for people who just push paper. Reyna accepted her credentials back and moved through the checkpoint without responding. The weight of the secure case felt familiar in her hand, reminiscent of equipment she had carried in other places, other times. Her steps were measured as she made her way to the intelligence section, her mind already shifting into the operational mindset that these briefings required. Inside her office, she arranged the materials with precision. Each briefing packet was identical, containing threat assessments organized by priority and geographic region. She had included satellite imagery with her own annotations, signals intelligence summaries that revealed patterns in enemy communications, and tactical recommendations based on current force postures. It was comprehensive work, the kind of analysis that could only come from understanding both the intelligence and how it would be applied in the field. Corporal Jimmy DeSoto appeared at her door, a young Marine who worked in the communications section. He was fresh from the School of Infantry, still carrying the enthusiasm of new service members who had not yet been ground down by bureaucracy. Staff Sergeant, do you need any help setting up the briefing room? He asked. I have it handled, Corporal, but thank you, Reyna replied. DeSoto lingered at the doorway, clearly wanting to say something more. Finally, he spoke up. Staff Sergeant, I just want to say that I appreciate how you carry yourself. Professional, you know? Some of the other NCOs, they let the contractors get to them. But you just do your job. Reyna looked at him for a moment, seeing in his face the younger version of so many Marines she had known. Focus on your duties, Corporal. That is all that matters in the end. Yes, Staff Sergeant, DeSoto said, but his respect was evident as he departed. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne arrived mid-morning with an update. The SEAL team was ahead of schedule. They would be arriving within the hour, not at the originally planned afternoon time. The acceleration sent a ripple of activity through the facility as final preparations were rushed to completion. You ready for this? Thorne asked Reyna. Yes, sir, she replied without hesitation. Good, because I put your name forward specifically. These SEALs requested someone with real operational intelligence experience, not just an analyst who has never left an air-conditioned office. You fit that requirement better than they know. Thorne left her with those words, and Reyna felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came before any operation. It was muscle memory, her body preparing for what her mind already understood was coming. She checked her uniform one final time, ensuring every detail was regulation perfect. The eagle, globe, and anchor on her collar gleamed under the office lights. In the hallway, she passed Burke, who was positioning his security team near the main entrance. He saw her carrying the briefing materials and could not resist one more jab. There goes the entertainment, he said to Trent. $5, says she stutters for the first 5 minutes. $10, says one of the SEALs asks a question she cannot answer, Trent countered. Wade laughed. I will throw in another 10 that says they cut her presentation short and asked to talk to someone with actual field experience. Their laughter followed her down the corridor, but Reyna's pace never changed. She had learned long ago to conserve energy for battles that mattered. These men were not her enemies, just obstacles to be navigated. The briefing room was a secure space designed for classified presentations. Reyna set up the materials at each seat, 6 packets arranged precisely around the conference table. She checked the projection system, verified the satellite imagery would display correctly, and ensured the classified network connection was stable. Her movements were efficient, born from countless briefings in far less comfortable settings. Colonel Iris Navarro, the facility commander, stopped by to observe the setup. She was a stern woman with 30 years of service, most of it in intelligence and strategic planning. Staff Sergeant Alvaro, the colonel said with a nod of approval. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne speaks highly of your work. Thank you, ma'am, Reyna replied. These SEAL teams can be demanding. They have seen a lot, operated in challenging environments. Do not let their intensity throw you off. Understood, ma'am, Reyna said, and something in her tone made Colonel Navarro look at her more closely. But the moment passed, and the colonel departed to prepare for the arrival. Reyna stood alone in the briefing room, surrounded by the materials she had prepared. Outside, she could hear increased radio chatter, security personnel coordinating for the arrival of the SEAL team. Burke's voice was prominent, trying to take charge of arrangements that did not require his involvement. She walked to the window and looked out over the facility grounds. The gate was visible from this angle, the checkpoint where she endured daily mockery from men who measured worth in volume and bravado. In a few minutes, that gate would admit 6 operators who understood a different kind of strength, who recognized capability in forms that Burke and his team could not comprehend. Her hands rested on the windowsill, those scarred hands that told stories she had stopped trying to share. The white lines across her knuckles caught the light, each mark a memory of moments when everything had depended on her being exactly who she was trained to be. The radio traffic intensified. Someone announced that vehicles were approaching from the highway. The SEAL team was 5 minutes out. Reyna turned from the window and did something she had not done in months. She allowed herself to stand at attention, alone in that briefing room, and remember who she had been before the shrapnel, before the medical board, before the forced transition to this quieter role. She remembered the call sign that men like Lieutenant Commander Rafferty had given her. She remembered operations that would never be discussed, actions that would never be acknowledged, and sacrifices that would never be decorated. Then she relaxed, smoothed her uniform one final time, and prepared to be exactly who she had always been. The SEALs were almost here, and everything was about to change. The radio crackle announced their arrival with clinical precision. 3 vehicles inbound, approaching main gate, proceed with standard security protocols. Burke's voice responded immediately, taking charge of the situation with an authority he had been rehearsing all week. Reyna stood in the briefing room doorway, watching the activity below through the corridor windows. The facility had transformed into a showcase of military efficiency, every detail arranged to impress the incoming SEALs. She noticed Colonel Navarro positioning herself near the entrance, flanked by Lieutenant Colonel Thorne and other senior staff. Burke stood prominently at the checkpoint, his team arranged in what he clearly thought was an impressive display of security professionalism. Trent had positioned himself at the vehicle scanner while Wade monitored the pedestrian gate. All 3 wore expressions of determined importance. The first vehicle appeared at the outer perimeter, a dark SUV with government plates. 2 more followed in precise formation. Burke straightened, his hand moving to his radio as if he were coordinating a presidential visit rather than a routine inspection. Reyna descended the stairs, her briefing materials secured in her arms. She had timed her movement to arrive at the entrance just as the visitors cleared security, professional protocol that Lieutenant Colonel Thorne had specifically requested. As she reached the main floor, she could see through the reinforced glass doors as the vehicles pulled to a stop. 6 men emerged from the SUVs with the casual confidence of operators who had nothing to prove. They wore standard Navy working uniforms, no special insignia beyond their rank and warfare pins. But something in the way they moved, the way they automatically scanned their environment and positioned themselves, marked them as different from ordinary service members. Burke stepped forward, clipboard in hand, ready to assert his control over the entry process. He began speaking before the lead SEAL had even reached the checkpoint, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Gentlemen, welcome to Naval Intelligence Facility North Island. I am Burke Hadley, Chief of Security Operations for Sentinel Solutions. We will be facilitating your inspection today and coordinating all security protocols." The lead SEAL, a lieutenant commander with silver at his temples, nodded politely but said nothing. His eyes were already moving past Burke, cataloging details of the facility with practiced assessment. Burke seemed not to notice, launching into a prepared speech about security procedures and clearance verification. Trent processed their credentials with exaggerated thoroughness, while Wade performed vehicle inspections that the SEALs clearly found unnecessary but tolerated with professional patience. Burke continued talking throughout, name-dropping his military police background and the special operations personnel he claimed to have worked with during his Army service. "We maintain the highest security standards here," Burke said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. 24-hour monitoring, multiple redundant systems, and personnel trained to military specifications. We run a tight ship. One of the SEALs, a chief petty officer with a weathered face and calm eyes, exchanged a glance with his teammate. It was a brief moment of silent communication that spoke volumes about their assessment of Burke's presentation. But they remained professional, accepting their visitor badges and preparing to enter the facility. Inside, Colonel Navarro greeted them with appropriate formality. She introduced Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, who would be coordinating their facility assessment, and several other senior staff members. Burke hovered nearby, tried to insert himself into every conversation. The lieutenant commander, whose name badge read Rafferty, shook hands with the assembled officers. His grip was firm, but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who had no need to prove his strength. "We appreciate the accommodation on short notice," Commander Rafferty said to Colonel Navarro. "Our training exercise concluded earlier than planned, and we wanted to complete these facility assessments while the team was available." "We are ready for you," Colonel Navarro replied. "Staff Sergeant Alvaro has prepared comprehensive intelligence briefings, and Lieutenant Colonel Thorne will coordinate your facility inspection protocols." At the mention of her name, Raina stepped forward from where she had been standing slightly behind the senior officers. She came to attention, her bearing precise and professional. "Staff Sergeant Raina Alvaro, sir," she said. "I have the briefing materials prepared when you are ready." Commander Rafferty looked at her, and for just a moment, his expression was unreadable. His eyes took in her uniform, her bearing, the way she held herself. Then he nodded politely. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. We will be ready for the brief in approximately 30 minutes. Burke, who had been standing too close to the conversation, chose that moment to interject. "Staff Sergeant Alvaro works in our intelligence section. Desk work mostly. Analysis and reports. I will be available if you need any operational security briefings from someone with field experience." The silence that followed was brief, but significant. Commander Rafferty's expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture. The chief petty officer standing behind him went very still. "I am sure the staff sergeant's briefing will be comprehensive," Commander Rafferty said, his tone neutral but final. Raina met Burke's eyes for just a moment. She saw the satisfaction there, the belief that he had successfully diminished her in front of these operators. He had no idea what was coming, no concept of the recognition that would occur once these men saw her face in proper context. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne guided the SEAL team toward the briefing room, discussing the agenda for the day. Burke followed, still trying to insert himself into the proceedings. Wade and Trent returned to the checkpoint, their duty complete, but their interest in the day's events still evident. Raina took a different route to the briefing room, using the time to center herself. She passed Corporal DeSoto in the hallway, who gave her an encouraging nod. The young Marine had no idea what was about to unfold, but his respect was genuine and appreciated. In the briefing room, she made final adjustments to the materials. The projection system displayed the facility logo, ready to transition to her presentation. The 6 briefing packets sat precisely arranged, each one representing hours of analysis and synthesis. She had done this before, briefed operators in forward locations where the intelligence she provided directly impacted survival. This was the same work, just in a different setting. Voices approached in the corridor. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne was explaining the facility's mission and capabilities, his voice professional and informative. Colonel Navarro added details about strategic importance and coordination with other naval intelligence assets. Burke's voice interjected periodically, trying to contribute information about security protocols that no one had asked for. Then they entered the briefing room, and everything changed. Commander Rafferty was first through the door, followed by his 5 teammates. The Chief Petty Officer came second, then 4 other SEALs whose rank insignia marked them as experienced operators. They moved into the room with the automatic spacing of men who had operated together extensively. Raina stood at the head of the conference table, her posture relaxed but professional. As Commander Rafferty's eyes met hers in the better light of the briefing room, something flickered across his face. Recognition, shock, disbelief, all compressed into a single instant before his professional mask snapped back into place. But it was too late. The Chief Petty Officer had seen her too, and his reaction was less controlled. He actually stopped walking, causing the SEAL behind him to bump slightly into his back. "Phantom," the Chief said quietly, the word escaping before he could stop it. The room went completely silent. Everyone froze, sensing that something significant had just occurred, but not understanding what. Burke looked confused, glancing between the SEALs and Raina with growing uncertainty. Commander Rafferty recovered first, his training reasserting control over his initial shock. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Raina's face, studying her as if confirming what his mind was telling him could not possibly be true. "Staff Sergeant Alvaro," he said slowly, testing the name against his memory. "Yes, sir," Raina replied, her voice steady and professional. The Chief Petty Officer moved closer, and Raina could now see his name badge clearly. Barone, Chief Petty Officer Levi Barone. She recognized him now, placed his face in the context of operations that felt like another lifetime. Burke sensed the strange atmosphere, but misread it completely. He stepped forward with forced confidence, attempting to regain control of the situation he felt slipping away. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" Burke asked. "If you need someone with more operational experience for the briefing, I can coordinate with Lieutenant Colonel Thorne to find an alternative presenter." Commander Rafferty turned to look at Burke, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "No," Commander Rafferty said, his voice carrying an edge that had not been there before. "That will not be necessary." Another SEAL, a petty officer first class whose badge read Kellen, had moved to get a better view of Raina. His eyes widened in recognition, and he looked quickly at Commander Rafferty as if seeking confirmation of what he was seeing. Colonel Navarro sensed the undercurrent of tension but could not identify its source. "Commander Rafferty, is everything all right? Do you require anything before the briefing begins?" "Ma'am, everything is fine," Rafferty replied, though his attention remained fixed on Raina. "We are ready to proceed with Staff Sergeant Alvaro's briefing." Lieutenant Colonel Thorne gestured toward the conference table. "Please, gentlemen, have a seat. Staff Sergeant Alvaro has prepared comprehensive threat assessments covering your operational areas." The SEALs moved to take their seats, but their formation had changed. They positioned themselves with clear sight lines to Raina, their body language shifting from polite inspection mode to something more intense, more focused. Burke noticed this change and misinterpreted it as anticipated scrutiny of someone he believed would fail under questioning. "This should be interesting," Burke muttered to Trent, who had lingered near the door. "Let us see how she handles real operators asking real questions." Raina moved to the presentation controls with practiced ease. The facility logo faded, replaced by a classified threat matrix that displayed enemy force dispositions across 3 operational theaters. She had done this countless times before, translating intelligence into actionable information for people whose lives depended on accuracy. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and authoritative. "This briefing covers current threat assessments for maritime and coastal operations in your assigned operational areas. The intelligence is current as of 0600 this morning and incorporates signals intelligence, human intelligence, and satellite reconnaissance." She moved through the first few slides with professional precision, outlining enemy capabilities and movement patterns. But she could feel the weight of the SEAL's attention, different from the usual focus of briefing recipients. They were not just listening to her information. They were studying her, confirming their suspicions, processing the impossibility of finding her here in this context. Commander Rafferty leaned forward slightly. "Staff Sergeant, your analysis of the coastal infiltration routes shows operational planning experience. Can you elaborate on how you identified these specific approach vectors?" It was a test question, the kind that would reveal whether she truly understood operational employment or was simply reading from prepared materials. Reyna met his eyes directly. "Sir, the approach vectors are based on tidal patterns, beach gradient analysis, and historical infiltration doctrine for this particular threat group. Cross-referencing their previous operations shows a preference for low-light conditions during quarter-moon phases when tidal flow provides maximum depth for small craft while maintaining concealment from coastal surveillance." The room went quiet. Burke shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that her answer was far more detailed and operationally focused than he had expected. Chief Barone nodded slowly, a gesture of professional acknowledgement. "And the counter-infiltration recommendations," Rafferty continued. "These suggest intimate knowledge of small unit tactics. The recommendations are based on standard force employment doctrine, sir," Reyna replied smoothly, but her eyes held Rafferty's for a moment longer than necessary. Both of them knew she was deflecting, protecting information that could not be discussed in this setting. Petty Officer Kellen spoke up, his voice carrying curiosity. "Staff Sergeant, how long have you been working in intelligence analysis?" 6 months at this facility," Reyna answered. "Prior to that, I had different assignments." "Different assignments," Chief Barone repeated quietly, and there was something in his tone that made Lieutenant Colonel Thorne look at him sharply. Burke could not contain himself any longer. He stepped forward, his voice artificially cheerful. "Staff Sergeant Alvaro has been with us since her transfer from administrative duties. She has done well adapting to intelligence work, though I'm sure it is quite different from her previous experience in personnel management." Reyna's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Commander Rafferty saw it, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Personnel management," Rafferty said, the words flat and neutral. "That is what her file indicated," Burke replied, clearly pleased with himself for contributing information. "We all have to start somewhere, right? Not everyone gets to do the exciting jobs." The SEALs exchanged glances, a rapid series of looks that communicated volumes in silence. The youngest SEAL, whose badge identified him as Petty Officer Second Class Morris, actually closed his eyes briefly as if witnessing something painful. Colonel Navarro sensed she was missing critical context. "Commander Rafferty, do you have concerns about Staff Sergeant Alvaro's qualifications for this briefing?" "No, ma'am," Rafferty said firmly. "No concerns whatsoever. In fact, I would like to request access to Staff Sergeant Alvaro's complete service record for coordination purposes." The temperature in the room shifted again. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne straightened in his chair, understanding now that something significant was occurring beyond his immediate comprehension. "Commander, Staff Sergeant Alvaro's complete service record requires additional clearances," Thorne said carefully. "Her file contains classified information related to previous assignments." "I have those clearances, Lieutenant Colonel," Rafferty replied, his voice carrying quiet authority. "And I suspect that once you review what I am clear to access, you will understand why this conversation is necessary." Burke looked confused, glancing between the senior officers and the SEALs. "What is going on?" Is there a security issue? No security issue, Chief Barone said, finally speaking directly to Burke. Just a recognition issue. Recognition, Burke repeated. What does that mean? It means, Petty Officer Kellen said, his voice edged with something that might have been anger or disbelief. That you have been talking to someone you clearly do not recognize. Raina remained standing at the head of the conference table, her briefing materials still displayed on the screen behind her. She had known this moment would come the instant Commander Rafferty had entered the room, had known it would unfold exactly like this, with recognition leading to questions, questions leading to her service record, and her service record leading to revelations that would transform how everyone in this facility saw her. Burke still did not understand, but uncertainty had crept into his expression. He looked at Raina as if seeing her for the first time, noting details he had missed before. The way she stood, balanced and centered. The scars on her hands that he had mocked as accidents. The absolute calm in her eyes that came from having faced far worse than his petty harassment. Colonel Navarro made a decision. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne, please retrieve Staff Sergeant Alvaro's complete service jacket. Bring it to this briefing room immediately. Yes, ma'am, Thorne replied, and there was respect in his voice that had always been there, but now carried additional weight. He left the room, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Commander Rafferty stood, facing Raina across the conference table. I think we should pause the briefing, Staff Sergeant, at least until certain facts are clarified. As you wish, sir, Raina replied, and for the first time that morning, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. The minutes stretched while they waited for Lieutenant Colonel Thorne to return with the service record. The briefing room had transformed into something between a courtroom and a confessional. Everyone present sensing that revelations were coming, but not yet understanding their nature. The SEALs had settled into a watchful stillness, their eyes moving between Raina and the door. Burke stood near the back of the room, his earlier confidence eroding under the weight of uncertainty. He had expected the SEALs to dismiss Raina, to validate his assessment of her as nothing more than a desk Marine who had never seen real action. Instead, they treated her with a deference that made no sense given what he believed he knew about her background. Trent had slipped into the room, drawn by the strange atmosphere. He positioned himself near Burke, whispering questions that went unanswered because Burke himself had no answers to give. Colonel Navarro remained standing, her posture military straight, but her expression thoughtful. She had commanded this facility for 2 years, had reviewed personnel files and service records as routine administrative duty. But something in Commander Rafferty's reaction suggested that Raina's file contained information she had either missed or not been clear to access. Chief Barone broke the silence, his voice careful and measured. Ma'am, with your permission, I would like to explain why Commander Rafferty requested the service record. Please do. Chief, Colonel Navarro replied. Barone looked at Raina, a question in his eyes. She gave him the smallest nod, permission granted for what he was about to reveal. Ma'am, approximately 4 years ago, my SEAL platoon was conducting operations in a hostile territory that I cannot name in this setting. We ran into a situation that went sideways fast. Enemy forces had us bracketed, we were taking casualties, and our extraction was compromised. He paused, the memory clearly still vivid despite the passage of time. A force reconnaissance team appeared out of nowhere. For Marines, moving through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate under fire. Their team leader directed our defensive perimeter, called in close air support with precision I have rarely seen, and personally provided counter-sniper fire that eliminated 3 enemy shooters who had us pinned. Burke's face had gone pale. Force reconnaissance. The words carried weight that even his limited understanding recognized. That team leader, Barone continued, pulled 3 of my wounded teammates out of the kill zone while rounds were still incoming. Moved like smoke, earned the call sign Phantom because you could not track their movement even when you were watching directly. Petty Officer Kellen spoke up, adding his own testimony. I was on a different operation 18 months after Chief Barone's. Different theater, different mission profile. Same Marine. She coordinated a multi-platform strike package while simultaneously running tactical command for a joint assault. I have worked with special operations personnel from every branch, and I have never seen anyone manage that level of complexity under fire. Commander Rafferty remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression serious. The Phantom of Force Recon became something of a legend in certain communities. Classified communities. People with the right clearances heard stories, read after-action reports, saw footage that will never be declassified. But very few people could put a face to the call sign. He turned to look directly at Reyna. Until now, he said quietly. Burke tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no words emerged. Trent had backed toward the door, as if physical distance could somehow separate him from the implications of what was being revealed. Wade appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, and Corporal DeSoto was visible behind him in the corridor. Word was spreading through the facility that something significant was happening in the briefing room. The youngest SEAL, Petty Officer Morris, added his contribution. My instructor at advanced training was a Marine gunnery sergeant who served in Force Recon. He mentioned the Phantom once, said that operator had done things that redefined what we thought was possible for individual capability in special operations. Colonel Navarro turned to Reyna, her expression a mixture of respect and something that might have been regret. Staff Sergeant, why did you not inform me of this background when you transferred to this facility? Ma'am, I was medically retired from field operations, Reyna replied, her voice steady. My previous assignments were classified, and my current role is in intelligence analysis. I saw no need to discuss operations that are no longer relevant to my duties. Not relevant, Chief Barone said, and there was heat in his voice now. Staff Sergeant, what you did saved lives. Multiple operations, multiple teams. That is always relevant. Burke had found his voice, though it came out smaller than before. Force reconnaissance? But her file said administrative duties, personnel management. Petty Officer Kellen looked at Burke with undisguised contempt. Her cover file said that. Standard operational security for personnel transitioning out of classified units. Did you actually think the Marine Corps would put real operational history in an unclassified record? The implications crashed over Burke like a wave. Every comment he had made, every dismissive joke, every mocking assessment had been directed at someone whose service record made his own military police experience look trivial by comparison. The realization showed on his face, color rising in his cheeks as humiliation replaced ignorance. Footsteps approached rapidly in the corridor. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne returned, carrying a sealed folder with classification markings visible on its cover. He handed it to Colonel Navarro with a meaningful look. Ma'am, you'll want to review this carefully, Thorne said. Some sections are above my clearance level, but what I could access was illuminating. Colonel Navarro opened the folder and began reading. Her eyes moved across the pages, widening slightly at certain passages. She flipped through documents, each page revealing another layer of Reyna's hidden history. The room watched in silence as the facility commander processed information that transformed her understanding of the Marine standing before her. Finally, she looked up, and her expression had changed completely. She looked at Reyna with the respect due to someone who had served in ways most service members never would. 5 combat deployments, Colonel Navarro read aloud. 3 classified operations with Joint Special Operations Task Forces. Decorated for valor under fire. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Valor Device. Purple Heart for wounds received while protecting teammates. She flipped to another page, her voice dropping. Medical retirement due to shrapnel wounds sustained during explosive ordnance incident. Subject used own body to shield 2 wounded Marines during secondary detonation. Injuries sustained required extensive reconstructive surgery to both hands. The scars. Burke remembered mocking those scars, calling them kitchen accidents, suggesting they came from incompetence. The memory made him feel physically ill. Colonel Navarro continued reading, though some sections she clearly could not discuss in present company. When she finished, she closed the folder and set it on the conference table with reverence usually reserved for flags at military funerals. Commander Rafferty, I believe you requested access to this record for coordination purposes, she said formally. Yes, ma'am, Rafferty replied. And having heard the summary, I can confirm that Staff Sergeant Alvaro's reputation in the special operations community is well-earned and well-deserved. He turned to face Reyna fully, coming to attention. Staff Sergeant, it is an honor to serve alongside you, even in this capacity. The other SEALs followed his lead, 5 operators standing at attention in respect for the Marine who had earned her place among them through actions that most people would never know about. Reyna accepted their recognition with quiet grace, but Burke noticed something else in her expression. Relief, perhaps, or maybe just acceptance that her secret was finally out, that she could stop pretending to be less than she was. Burke wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. The atmosphere in the briefing room had fundamentally shifted. Where moments before there had been routine inspection protocol, now there existed something closer to a reunion between warriors who understood a shared language of sacrifice and capability. The SEALs had relaxed their formal posture but maintained their attention on Reyna with unmistakable respect. Burke remained frozen near the back of the room, his mind racing through every interaction he had had with Reyna over the past 6 months. Each mocking comment, each dismissive gesture, each joke about her clean uniform and desk duty now replayed with horrifying clarity. He had spent half a year belittling someone whose service record made his own look like a footnote. Trent had edged closer to the door, his face ashen. Wade stood in the corridor, visible through the open doorway, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Even from a distance, the weight of their mistake was obvious. Colonel Navarro set the service record on the conference table, her hand resting on it, as if drawing strength from the documented history it contained. She looked at Burke with an expression that promised consequences. Mr. Hadley, I believe you mentioned that Staff Sergeant Alvaro was assigned to administrative duties before her current position, the colonel said, her voice deceptively calm. That is what the basic file indicated, ma'am, Burke managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The basic file, Colonel Navarro repeated. The unclassified cover file, designed to protect operational security for personnel transitioning from special operations units. Did it occur to you to question why a Marine Staff Sergeant would require such extensive security protocols around their service history? Burke had no answer. Commander Rafferty provided it for him. Most people do not question what they think they already understand, Rafferty said, looking at Burke with cold assessment. They make assumptions based on surface details and never bother to look deeper. It is a dangerous habit, particularly in security work. Chief Barone stepped forward, and there was steel in his voice now. We trusted this Marine with our lives. She earned that trust by being exactly who she needed to be when everything was on the line. And you treated her like she was less than nothing. Burke tried to speak, to offer some explanation or apology, but Petty Officer Kellen cut him off. How many times, Chief Barone asked, his question directed at Burke, but his eyes on Reyna. How many times did you mock her service? Make jokes about her uniform being too clean? Suggest she had never seen real action? The silence was damning. Burke's inability to deny the accusation spoke louder than any confession. Every day, Reyna said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. Every morning at the checkpoint, every time I passed through security, every interaction was an opportunity for dismissal and mockery. Her voice remained steady, professional, but there was something beneath it now. Not anger exactly. More like the calm statement of facts from someone who had endured worse and survived. I was told my uniform was too clean, that I was playing Marine, that I would not last a day in real operations. I was called a desk jockey, a paper pusher, someone who had washed out of real service. Every single day for 6 months. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tight. He had known some of this, had witnessed the dynamic at the checkpoint, but hearing it laid out in complete detail made the pattern impossible to ignore. Colonel Navarro's expression had gone from stern to furious. She turned to Burke with barely controlled anger. You have been harassing a decorated combat veteran, a Marine who sustained wounds protecting her teammates. An operator who saved the lives of personnel from multiple services, including the Navy SEALs standing in this room. Do you understand the magnitude of your misconduct? Burke nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Yes, ma'am. I do not think you do, Commander Rafferty said, his voice cutting. Staff Sergeant Alvaro carried a security clearance higher than yours. She has operational experience that you could not comprehend even if someone explained it to you in detail. She has done things that will remain classified for decades, things that directly contributed to national security and the safety of American service members. He stepped closer to Burke, and the physical presence of the SEAL commander was overwhelming. And you treated her like she was beneath you, Rafferty continued. You used your position at this facility's entrance to diminish someone who has earned respect from every tier of the special operations community. That is not just harassment. That is a fundamental failure to recognize capability and worth. Petty Officer Morris, the youngest SEAL, spoke up with the passion of someone still close to his own training experiences. My instructor said that the Phantom redefined operational standards, said that Marines' after-action reports were studied at command level because they demonstrated tactical innovation under extreme pressure. Those reports are teaching tools now. Burke looked at Raina, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the scars on her hands with new understanding, saw the way she held herself with the balanced readiness of someone whose muscle memory included combat responses. He saw the calm in her eyes that came from having faced death and made decisions when lives depended on her being right. Staff Sergeant, I apologize, Burke said, the words inadequate and empty even as he spoke them. I did not know. You did not ask, Raina replied simply. You assumed you knew who I was based on where you found me, what role I currently serve. You never considered that there might be more to the story. Chief Barone turned to Colonel Navarro. Ma'am, with respect, this is a security issue beyond personal harassment. If your facility's security contractors cannot recognize capability in the people they're supposed to be protecting, how can they effectively maintain actual security? The question landed like a bomb. Colonel Navarro's expression showed she had already reached the same conclusion. Mr. Hadley, your contract with this facility is under immediate review, she said formally. You and your team will be replaced pending investigation into your conduct and your firm's hiring and training protocols. You are dismissed from this briefing and should report to facility security for processing. Burke opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. There was nothing to say, no defense to offer. He had built his own downfall through 6 months of arrogant assumptions and petty cruelty. He turned toward the door, Trent stepping aside to let him pass. Wade, standing in the corridor, looked at Raina with something that might have been regret or shame. He had participated in the daily mockery, had laughed at the jokes, had contributed to the hostile environment. Now he understood what they had done, who they had targeted, and the weight of that realization showed on every face of Burke's security team. Commander Rafferty watched Burke leave, then turned back to Raina. Staff Sergeant, I believe we interrupted your briefing. Would you be willing to continue? We came here to receive intelligence support, and I cannot think of anyone more qualified to provide it. Of course, sir, Raina replied, moving back to the presentation controls. The briefing resumed, but everything had changed. The SEALs asked questions with the respect due to a fellow operator, recognizing that her intelligence analysis was informed by operational experience they could trust absolutely. Colonel Navarro remained in the room, observing how the dynamic had transformed now that truth had replaced assumption. In the corridor outside, word spread through the facility with the speed of military gossip. The quiet Marine Staff Sergeant who worked in intelligence was not what anyone had thought. She was a legend, a warrior, someone whose service had earned recognition in circles most service members would never access. Corporal DeSoto, standing near the communications section, felt validation for the respect he had instinctively shown her. The young Marines throughout the facility began to understand that competence and capability often wore humble faces, that the loudest voices were rarely the most accomplished. And Burke, walking toward the security office to begin the process of his dismissal, understood too late that respect could not be demanded or assumed. It had to be earned through action, demonstrated through character and maintained through integrity. Reyna had earned all of those things in places he would never see, doing things he could never comprehend, making sacrifices he would never be asked to make. And he had spent 6 months trying to diminish someone who stood taller than he could ever hope to reach. The briefing continued for another 90 minutes, and the difference was stark. Where before Reyna had presented information with professional detachment, now she engaged with the SEALs as peers. They asked questions that probed operational implications, and she answered with insights that could only come from having executed similar missions herself. Commander Rafferty leaned forward during her analysis of enemy communication patterns. Your assessment suggests they're using a dispersed command structure. How would you recommend we exploit that vulnerability? Reyna did not hesitate. Sir, dispersed command creates decision delays. If you can identify their communication nodes and create simultaneous pressure points, you force them to choose between maintaining communication security and responding effectively to threats. The gap between those choices is your operational window. Chief Barone nodded appreciatively. That is exactly the kind of tactical insight we needed. The doctrine manuals talk about exploiting command structure, but you are describing how to actually execute it. Because I have done it, Reyna replied simply. Different theater, different enemy, but the principle remains constant. Pressure applied at the right points creates opportunities that did not exist before. Petty Officer Kellen studied the satellite imagery she had annotated. These infiltration routes you identified. The timing windows are incredibly specific. How did you calculate them with this level of precision? Tidal charts, lunar cycles, historical weather patterns, and cultural factors, Reyna explained. This particular enemy group observes certain religious practices that affect their operational tempo. Cross-reference those factors with optimal navigation conditions, and the windows become predictable. The SEALs exchanged impressed looks. This was not academic analysis. This was operational intelligence from someone who understood both the technical aspects and the human factors that determined when and how enemies would act. Colonel Navarro watched from her position near the door, her expression thoughtful. She had approved Reyna's transfer 6 months ago based on Lieutenant Colonel Thorne's recommendation, trusting his assessment that she would be valuable in intelligence analysis. But she had not understood the full scope of what Reyna brought to the position. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne himself stood quietly in the corner, satisfaction evident in his bearing. He had known exactly who Reyna was when he requested her transfer, had known that her operational experience would inform intelligence analysis in ways that purely academic analysts could never achieve. The vindication of his decision was complete. As the briefing concluded, Commander Rafferty stood and extended his hand to Reyna. Staff Sergeant, that was exceptional work. Your analysis will directly impact our operational planning, and I want you to know that it will save lives. Just doing my job, sir, Reyna replied, shaking his hand. No, Rafferty said firmly. You are doing far more than your job. You are bringing operational expertise to intelligence work, and that combination is rare and valuable. Chief Barone approached next, and his handshake lasted longer. Phantom, it has been 4 years since you pulled my team out of that situation. I never got to properly thank you. So thank you. For my life and for the lives of the men you saved that day. You would have done the same, Chief, Reyna said. Maybe, Barone replied. But you actually did it. That makes all the difference. Each SEAL took time to acknowledge her contribution, their respect genuine and earned through shared understanding of what operational service truly meant. Petty Officer Morris, the youngest, seemed almost starstruck. Staff Sergeant, my instructor is going to lose his mind when I tell him I met you, Morris said. He talks about the Phantom operation in that mountain valley. Said it was textbook precision under impossible conditions. Your instructor exaggerates, Reyna replied with a slight smile. It was just Marines doing what Marines do. That is exactly what he said you would say. Morris laughed. Colonel Navarro waited until the SEALs had finished their individual acknowledgments before approaching Reyna herself. She held the classified service record in her hands, the weight of it suddenly symbolic of everything she had not understood about the Marines standing before her. Staff Sergeant Alvaro, I owe you an apology, the colonel said formally. I should have investigated more thoroughly when I became aware of the harassment you were experiencing. I should have questioned why someone with your clearance level and rank was being treated with such disrespect. Ma'am, you could not have known without accessing classified records, Reyna replied. And I did not request intervention. That does not excuse my failure to protect you from a hostile work environment, Colonel Navarro said firmly. Mr. Hadley and his team created conditions that were unacceptable, and I allowed it to continue because I did not look closely enough at the situation. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. I am assigning you additional responsibilities, effective immediately. You will oversee all intelligence briefings for special operations personnel visiting this facility. You will also conduct a comprehensive review of our security protocols and provide recommendations for improvement. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne will brief you on the specifics. Yes, ma'am, Reyna said, recognizing the assignment for what it was. An acknowledgement of her capabilities, a restoration of appropriate responsibility, and an opportunity to contribute at the level her experience warranted. Commander Rafferty spoke up. Colonel, if I may make a request. We conduct quarterly coordination meetings with various intelligence facilities. I would like Staff Sergeant Alvaro to be included in those meetings. Her operational perspective would benefit multiple teams. Approved, Colonel Navarro said without hesitation. Staff Sergeant, you will coordinate with Commander Rafferty's team for those meetings. The official business concluded, but the SEALs lingered in the briefing room. This was not just professional courtesy. This was the reunion of people who had served in the same crucible, who understood costs that others could not comprehend. Chief Barone pulled something from his pocket, a challenge coin bearing the SEAL trident and his team's insignia. He placed it in Reyna's hand, closing her scarred fingers around it. For the Phantom, he said quietly, from the men you saved and the men we trained after learning from your example. Reyna looked at the coin, feeling its weight. Challenge coins were currency in the military community, tokens of respect and recognition passed between warriors. This one represented more than acknowledgement. It represented brotherhood across service lines, the bond formed by shared danger and mutual sacrifice. I will treasure this, Chief, she said simply. Petty Officer Kellen added his own coin, as did Morris and the other SEALs. Commander Rafferty was last, his coin bearing additional markings that indicated command authority. You have always been one of us, Phantom, Rafferty said. Today just made it official. The briefing room door opened and Corporal DeSoto appeared, uncertainty on his young face. He had clearly heard the news spreading through the facility and was unsure whether he should interrupt. Corporal, Reyna called out. Come in. DeSoto entered hesitantly, conscious of the senior officers and SEALs present. He came to attention automatically. Staff Sergeant, I just wanted to say, DeSoto began, then seemed to run out of words. Speak freely, Corporal, Reyna said gently. Ma'am, I always respected you, but I did not know why. I just knew you carried yourself different. Now I understand. And I want to say thank you for showing us what real professionalism looks like, even when people try to tear you down. Reyna smiled at him, a genuine expression that transformed her usually controlled features. Stay focused on your duties, Corporal. That is what matters. Not what others say, not what they think they know. Just your own integrity and competence. Yes, Staff Sergeant, DeSoto replied, and the conviction in his voice showed he understood the lesson. As the room emptied, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne remained behind with Reyna. They stood together in comfortable silence, two intelligence professionals who had always understood each other. You knew, Reyna said, when you requested my transfer. You knew exactly who I was. I read your complete file, Thorne confirmed. Every page, including the sections that made me upgrade my own clearance to access. I knew this facility needed your expertise, and I knew you needed a place where your mind could still serve even after your body could no longer handle field operations. Thank you, sir, Reyna said. No, Thorne replied. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for your service then and your service now. Both matter equally. The afternoon sun slanted through the briefing room windows as the facility settled into a new rhythm. Word had spread with the efficiency of military communication networks, traveling from the briefing room through every corridor and office. The quiet Marine Staff Sergeant was not who anyone had thought. She was a legend, and everyone who had witnessed or participated in her mistreatment now faced the weight of their actions. Burke sat in the security office, processing his termination paperwork. The administrative officer handling his dismissal was coldly professional, explaining that his contract was being terminated for cause. Sentinel Security Solutions had already been notified, and their regional manager was en route to address what was being termed a significant personnel failure. Trent and Wade waited in an adjacent room, their own futures uncertain. The entire security contract was under review, and none of them expected to remain at the facility. The shame was palpable, hanging over them like smoke. In the facility cafeteria, Marines gathered in small groups, discussing the revelations with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some had suspected there was more to Staff Sergeant Alvaro than her quiet demeanor suggested. Others were completely shocked, their understanding of her transformed in a single afternoon. "She saved SEALs," one Lance Corporal said, his voice carrying across the dining area. "Under fire. Multiple operations." They gave her challenge coins right there in the briefing room. A sergeant from the communications section shook her head, and we just walked past her every day like she was nobody special. Meanwhile, Burke and his crew were treating her like garbage. Corporal DeSoto sat with several other junior Marines, and they looked to him for details since he had been in the briefing room during part of the revelations. "She was calm the whole time," DeSoto explained. Even when they were reading her service record out loud, talking about combat deployments and wounds sustained protecting her team, she just stood there like it was normal, like saving lives under fire was just another day at work. "What did the SEALs say?" another corporal asked. "They called her Phantom," DeSoto replied. "Said she was a legend in special operations." One of them said she redefined operational standards. Can you imagine? And Burke was calling her a desk jockey who had never seen action. The cafeteria fell silent at that, everyone contemplating the magnitude of Burke's mistake and their own complicity in allowing the hostile environment to continue unchallenged. In Colonel Navarro's office, a very different conversation was taking place. The facility commander had called an emergency meeting with her senior staff, including Lieutenant Colonel Thorne and the heads of security, operations, and administration. "This is a command failure," Colonel Navarro said bluntly. "We allowed a decorated combat veteran to be harassed daily by contractors who should never have been in a position of authority at this facility. That ends now." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each officer. "Effective immediately, we are implementing new protocols. All security personnel will undergo comprehensive training on recognizing and respecting military service across all specialties. We will establish clear reporting mechanisms for harassment, and we will ensure that every person at this facility understands that competence and capability come in many forms." Lieutenant Colonel Thorne added his perspective. "Staff Sergeant Alvaro never complained, never sought special treatment, never used her background to demand respect. She simply did her job with excellence every single day. That should have been enough. The fact that it was not reflects poorly on our facility culture." The head of administration, a Navy commander named Sullivan, spoke up. "I reviewed the initial harassment reports filed by junior Marines who witnessed the treatment Staff Sergeant Alvaro received. Those reports were dismissed as personality conflicts. We failed to investigate properly. That failure is unacceptable," Colonel Navarro said firmly. "Every report will now be investigated thoroughly, regardless of who is involved. Service members will be protected from hostile work environments, period." Meanwhile, in her office, Raina sat alone for the first time since the morning's revelations. The challenge coins from the SEAL team were arranged on her desk, their metal surfaces catching the afternoon light. She picked up Commander Rafferty's coin, turning it over in her scarred hands. The past 6 months had been a test of a different kind than the operation she had conducted in force reconnaissance. No one was shooting at her here, but the daily erosion of dignity had its own cost. She had endured it with the same discipline she applied to everything else, knowing that her worth was not determined by Burke's opinion or anyone else's assessment. But she was human enough to feel relief that the truth was finally known, that she no longer had to maintain the careful separation between who she had been and who she appeared to be now. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see a Marine major she recognized from facility operations but had never directly worked with. He stood at attention in her doorway. "Staff Sergeant Alvaro, I have a moment," he asked. "Of course, sir," Reyna replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. The major entered, and she noticed he carried a folder. He sat down, setting the folder on her desk before speaking. "I need to apologize," he said directly. "I witnessed some of the treatment you received at the checkpoint. I heard the comments, saw the disrespect, and I did nothing because I assumed the contractors knew something I did not, that perhaps there was some justification I was not aware of." Reyna remained silent, letting him continue. "That was cowardice on my part," the major said. "I should have investigated. I should have intervened. Instead, I took the easy path and looked the other way. For that, I am deeply sorry." He opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be official paperwork. "I have written a formal commendation for your personnel file, detailing the professionalism and expertise you have demonstrated during your time at this facility. It is inadequate compared to what you deserve, but it is what I can offer." Reyna accepted the commendation, reading it briefly. The words were genuine, the assessment fair and detailed. She looked up at the major. "Thank you, sir. Your acknowledgement means something." The major stood, came to attention, and rendered a proper salute. Reyna rose and returned it, the gesture carrying weight that transcended rank structure. This was one warrior recognizing another, respect earned and respect given. After he left, Reyna returned to her chair and allowed herself a moment of reflection. 6 months ago, she had arrived at this facility fresh from medical retirement, carrying wounds visible and invisible. She had been assigned to intelligence work, a role that used her mind while acknowledging her body could no longer sustain the physical demands of force reconnaissance operations. She had expected to serve quietly, to contribute without fanfare, to find purpose in analysis rather than action. But Burke and his team had made that impossible, their daily harassment forcing her to maintain walls that grew increasingly difficult to sustain. Now those walls were down. The truth was known. And while she had not sought recognition or validation, she could admit to herself that having her service acknowledged felt right in a way she had not anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Colonel Thorne. The SEAL team wanted to have dinner off base before they departed tomorrow morning. Commander Rafferty specifically requested her presence. It was not an order, but the invitation carried significance beyond a simple meal. Reyna typed her acceptance and sent it. Tonight, she would sit with operators who understood the language of sacrifice and service. They would share stories that could never be written down, remember operations that would remain classified, and honor the bonds forged in places where failure meant death. But first, she had work to complete. The intelligence reports still needed analysis. The threat assessments still required updates, and her responsibilities had just expanded significantly. She was still the same Marine she had been this morning, still committed to excellence, still focused on her mission. The only difference was that now, everyone else knew it too, and that changed everything while changing nothing at all. She was still Reyna Alvaro, still the Phantom, still a warrior who served with quiet competence regardless of recognition. But recognition, when it came from those who truly understood, carried a value that could not be measured or quantified. It simply was like respect and honor and the bonds between those who had faced darkness together and emerged still standing. The restaurant was a quiet establishment near the naval base, the kind of place where service members gathered off duty to decompress and connect. Commander Rafferty had chosen it deliberately, a neutral space where rank mattered less than shared experience. The SEAL team occupied a private section in the back, and Reyna arrived to find them already settled, still in uniform, but with the formal stiffness of the day relaxed into something more genuine. "Phantom," Chief Barone called out, standing as she approached. "We saved you the seat of honor." The chair he indicated placed her at the center of the table, flanked by operators who had seen her work firsthand and understood what it meant. She accepted the position without false modesty, recognizing that this dinner was as much ritual as meal, a ceremony of acknowledgement among warriors. Commander Rafferty raised his water glass as she settled in. To Staff Sergeant Alvaro, he said, for service that saved lives, for sacrifice that will never be fully known, and for continuing to serve with excellence even when no one recognized what you had already given. The SEALs raised their glasses in unison, the gesture simple but weighted with meaning. Reyna accepted the toast with quiet grace, then raised her own glass. To all who serve in the dark, she replied, may their sacrifices never be forgotten by those who understand. They drank together, and the formality dissolved into conversation that ranged across operations, training evolution, and the peculiar challenges of transitioning from direct action to support roles. These were discussions that could not happen in official settings, stories that lived in the spaces between classified reports and sanitized briefings. Petty Officer Kellen asked the questions several of them had been thinking. How did you handle it? 6 months of daily disrespect from people who had no idea who you really were. I think it would have driven me crazy. Reyna considered her answer carefully. I remembered that my worth was not determined by their assessment. I knew what I had done, what I had sacrificed, what I was still capable of contributing. Their ignorance was their problem, not mine. But it still had to hurt, Petty Officer Morris said, his youth making him more emotionally direct than the senior operators. Being treated like you were nothing when you had done so much. It did, Reyna admitted. Not because I needed their validation, but because it represented a failure to see capability when it was standing right in front of them. That kind of blindness is dangerous in security work, dangerous in military service, dangerous in life. Chief Barone nodded thoughtfully. Burke measured competence by volume and swagger. He could not recognize real capability because it did not match his limited understanding of what strength looks like. Commander Rafferty added his perspective. The best operators I have known are often the quietest. They do not need to announce their capabilities because those capabilities speak for themselves when the situation demands it. You embodied that principle perfectly, Staff Sergeant. The food arrived, and conversation continued around mouthfuls of steak and pasta. They traded stories from different theaters, different operations, finding common threads in experiences separated by time and geography. The language of combat operations was universal among those who had served, a shared vocabulary of acronyms and tactical terms that needed no explanation. How are your hands? Chief Barone asked during a lull in conversation, his question referencing the scars that had drawn so much mockery from Burke. Reyna flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar tightness of reconstructed tissue. Functional. Not what they were, but good enough for what I need them to do now. The surgeons did excellent work considering what they had to work with. What happened? Morris asked, then immediately looked uncertain. I mean, if you can talk about it. Secondary explosion while evacuating wounded, Reyna said simply. Shrapnel from an improvised explosive device. I was shielding 2 Marines when it detonated. The shrapnel that hit me did not hit them. She said it matter-of-factly, without drama or embellishment, but the SEALs understood exactly what that meant. She had knowingly placed her body between her teammates and an explosion, accepting wounds to protect others. It was the definition of valor, the kind of decision that happened in microseconds and echoed across lifetimes. The 2 Marines you shielded, Kellen asked. Did they make it? Yes, Reyna replied. Full recovery. One of them is still serving. The other completed his enlistment and went home to his family. Both sent me messages when they heard about my retirement. They understood what it cost. Rafferty raised his glass again. To the wounded warrior who became an intelligence asset, proving that service takes many forms and all of them matter. Again, they drank together, and Reyna felt something shift inside her chest. She had carried the weight of her transition from field operations to intelligence work with quiet dignity, never complaining about the loss of her former capabilities. But she had mourned them privately, grieved the end of a career path she had loved with singular focus. Tonight, surrounded by operators who understood both what she had been and what she was now, she felt that grief begin to ease. Her service had not ended with her field career. It had simply transformed into something different, something equally valuable, even if less visible. The evening progressed with stories and laughter, the kind of dark humor that service members use to process experiences that civilians could not comprehend. They talked about failed equipment and unexpected challenges, about moments of absolute terror and instances of profound connection between team members who trusted each other with their lives. As dinner wound down, Commander Rafferty brought up the practical matter that had been hovering unspoken throughout the meal. Staff Sergeant, I meant what I said about including you in our quarterly coordination meetings. But I want to offer something more. We run advanced training for joint intelligence operations. It brings together personnel from different services and different specialties to cross-pollinate knowledge and build relationships. I want you to instruct. Raina looked at him, processing the offer. Teaching was different from analyzing, required different skills and different engagement. But it would allow her to pass forward what she had learned, to train the next generation of intelligence professionals with the benefit of her operational experience. I will be honored, sir, she said. Do not be too honored yet, Barone added with a grin. These students will ask impossible questions and challenge every assumption. They are smart, motivated, and completely fearless about pushing back on conventional wisdom. Good, Raina replied. That is exactly what effective intelligence work requires. Questioning assumptions and challenging conventional wisdom saves lives. Petty Officer Kellen pulled out his phone, bringing up a photograph. This is my team now. Different guys than the ones you worked with 4 years ago, but they know your legend. Would you mind if I show them this photo? Proof that the Phantom is real and still serving. Raina hesitated, her instinct toward operational security warring with recognition that her story was already spreading through special operations communities. Finally, she nodded. Tell them that capability matters more than recognition, she said. Tell them that service continues long after the visible parts end. And tell them that the quiet professionals are often the most competent. I will, Kellen promised, snapping the photo as Raina sat surrounded by SEALs who treated her as one of their own. The evening concluded with exchanges of contact information and promises to coordinate on future training and operations. As they prepared to leave, Commander Rafferty pulled Raina aside for a private word. You handled today with remarkable grace, he said quietly. Lesser people would have used the revelation as a weapon, would have made Burke and his team suffer more than they already did. But you maintained your professionalism throughout. That impressed me as much as your combat record. I learned a long time ago that revenge is a waste of energy better spent on productive work, Raina replied. Burke and his team will face consequences from their own actions. I do not need to pile on. That wisdom is exactly why you will be valuable as an instructor, Rafferty said. Technical skills can be taught. Character and perspective have to be earned through experience. You have both in abundance. They parted with mutual respect, warriors from different services bound by shared understanding of what true service required. Raina drove back toward her quarters, the challenge coins in her pocket and the memory of the evening warming something inside her that had been cold for 6 months. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight had given her something equally important. Recognition from those who truly understood, validation from peers who measured worth in the currency of sacrifice and competence. That was enough. Morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the sky washed clean by overnight winds. Raina approached the facility checkpoint with the same measured pace she had maintained for 6 months, but everything had changed. Burke and his team were gone, replaced by new security contractors who had been briefed thoroughly on protocol and respect. The new chief of security, a former Marine gunnery sergeant named Elena Pritchard, stood at the checkpoint reviewing procedures with her team. She saw Raina approach and came to immediate attention. Good morning, Staff Sergeant Alvaro, Pritchard said, her tone professional but warm. We are honored to have you at this facility. Good morning, Raina replied, presenting her credentials. The security check was efficient and respectful. No mockery, no dismissive comments, no attempts to diminish her presence. Pritchard processed her identification quickly, then added something unexpected. Staff Sergeant, Colonel Navarro briefed us on your background and your contributions to this facility. I want you to know that my team understands the importance of recognizing capability in all its forms. If you ever experience disrespect from my personnel, I want to know about it immediately. Understood, Raina said, appreciating the directness. And thank you. Inside the facility, the transformation was equally evident. Marines who had previously passed her with cursory nods now stopped to acknowledge her properly. Some offered direct thanks for her service. Others simply showed the respect that had always been due but had been withheld by the toxic environment Burke had created. Corporal DeSoto intercepted her in the corridor, practically vibrating with excitement. Staff Sergeant, I have news. The career counselor told me about force reconnaissance training. I am putting in my application. Raina studied the young Marine carefully. It is demanding work, Corporal. The selection process alone eliminates most candidates. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? I am, Staff Sergeant DeSoto replied with conviction. You showed me what that service looks like. Not the loud posturing that Burke and his team displayed, but quiet competence and absolute dedication. That is what I want to embody. Then prepare yourself thoroughly, Raina said. Physical conditioning is just the baseline. Mental toughness, adaptability, and emotional intelligence matter just as much. Study the doctrine, understand the mission sets, and never stop learning. I will, Staff Sergeant DeSoto promised. And thank you for being an example worth following. After he departed, Raina continued to her office where Lieutenant Colonel Thorne was waiting with updates. The SEAL team had departed at dawn, but Commander Rafferty had left detailed coordination requests for her participation in upcoming training exercises. The quarterly coordination meetings would begin next month, and she was listed as a primary instructor for the intelligence track. Additionally, Thorne explained, Colonel Navarro has authorized you to establish an intelligence training program for this facility. You will develop curriculum, select participants, and conduct advanced instruction for Marines assigned to intelligence specialties. This is in addition to your current analytical duties. Raina absorbed the information, already forming ideas about curriculum structure and training methodology. She could pass forward the lessons learned from operational experience, teach the next generation how intelligence work directly impacted mission success and survival. I will need access to classified training materials and coordination with other intelligence facilities, she said. Already approved, Thorne replied. You have been granted increased access authorities and liaison permissions with special operations intelligence units across all services. He paused, then added something more personal. Staff Sergeant, watching you handle the past 6 months taught me something important. True professionalism is not just competence under ideal conditions. It is maintaining excellence despite adversity, continuing to serve even when that service goes unrecognized. You demonstrated that principle perfectly. Thank you, sir, Raina said, but I was just doing what any Marine should do. No, Thorne corrected gently. You were doing what few Marines could do. That is what makes your service exceptional. The morning progressed with Raina diving into her expanded responsibilities. She outlined training modules that would integrate operational experience with analytical methodology, creating a comprehensive program that would elevate intelligence capabilities throughout the facility. The work was engaging, purposeful, and satisfying in ways that pure analysis alone could never be. At midday, Colonel Navarro summoned her to the command office. Raina arrived to find not just the colonel, but several other senior officers assembled. The atmosphere was formal, and she sensed something significant was about to occur. Staff Sergeant Alvaro, Colonel Navarro began. In recognition of your exceptional service and contributions to this facility's mission, I am presenting you with a letter of commendation for your permanent record. This letter specifically cites your intelligence analysis expertise, your professionalism under adverse conditions, and your embodiment of Marine Corps values. She handed Reyna an official document bearing multiple signatures, including her own and those of visiting commanders from other installations. It was a formal acknowledgement, the kind of documentation that would follow Reyna throughout her career and beyond. Additionally, Colonel Navarro continued, I have nominated you for the Defense Intelligence Agency Civilian Analyst Award. While you are not a civilian, your work meets the criteria for exceptional intelligence contribution, and I believe your nomination will be seriously considered. Thank you, ma'am, Reyna replied, genuinely moved by the recognition. You earned it, the colonel said firmly. Every word in that letter, every citation in that nomination is supported by documented evidence of excellence. You deserve to be recognized for what you contribute, not just what you have already done. After the brief ceremony, Reyna returned to her office carrying the letter of commendation. She placed it carefully in her desk drawer, next to the challenge coins from the SEAL team. These tangible items represented something intangible but vital. They represented respect earned, service acknowledged, and capability recognized by those whose opinions actually mattered. Her phone buzzed with an email from an address she did not immediately recognize. Opening it, she found a message from one of the Marines she had shielded during the explosion that ended her field career. He had heard through the military network about the recent events at her facility and wanted to reach out. The email was brief but powerful. He thanked her again for saving his life, mentioned that he thought of her sacrifice every day, and expressed pride that she continued to serve with distinction. He included a photo of his family, his young children, and noted that none of them would exist if she had not been there that day. Reyna read the email twice, feeling emotions she usually kept carefully controlled. This was why she had served, why she continued to serve despite the wounds and the limitations and the daily challenges. Lives saved, families preserved, service honored through continued dedication even when the form of that service changed. She composed a response, keeping it professional but warm, thanking him for reaching out and expressing genuine happiness that he was thriving. Then she returned to work, diving into the training curriculum with renewed focus and purpose. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. A Marine colonel she did not recognize appeared at her office door, introducing himself as the commanding officer of Marine Forces Special Operations Command. He had heard about the situation at her facility and wanted to meet her personally. Staff Sergeant Alvaro, the colonel said after Reyna invited him to sit. I reviewed your complete service record, including sections that required my specific clearance level to access. What you accomplished during your time with Force Reconnaissance was remarkable. The operations you participated in, the lives you saved, the innovations you brought to tactical intelligence employment all contributed significantly to our understanding of how to integrate intelligence professionals into direct action teams. He leaned forward, his expression serious and respectful. I want to offer you an opportunity, he continued. We are establishing a new training program at the Special Operations School, focused on intelligence integration for special operations units. I need instructors who have actually done this work, who understand both the theory and the brutal reality of intelligence employment under combat conditions. I need you. Reyna felt her pulse quicken. This was an opportunity to impact the special operations community at a fundamental level, to ensure that future intelligence professionals and operators understood how to work together effectively. It was a chance to transform her operational experience into institutional knowledge that would outlive her own service. Sir, I would be honored to contribute, she said carefully, but my medical limitations would need to be considered. We are not asking you to conduct field operations, the colonel replied. We need your mind, your experience, your ability to train others. The physical demands of instruction are well within your current capabilities. And frankly, your experience of adapting to new limitations makes you uniquely qualified to help others understand that capability is not defined by physical perfection. When would this begin? Reyna asked. 6 months from now, the colonel said. That gives you time to complete your current commitments here and transition appropriately. Think about it. Discuss it with Colonel Navarro and Lieutenant Colonel Thorne. But know that this offer comes from the highest levels of Marine Special Operations leadership, and we genuinely believe you are the right person for this role. After he departed, Reyna sat quietly in her office, contemplating the path that had led her to this moment. 3 weeks had passed since the SEAL team inspection, and the facility had settled into its new normal. Reyna walked through the corridors with the same measured pace she had always maintained, but the atmosphere around her had fundamentally transformed. Respect had replaced mockery, acknowledgement had replaced dismissal, and understanding had replaced ignorant assumptions. The training program she had developed was already showing results. Young Marines gathered in her classroom 3 times a week, absorbing lessons that combined doctrinal knowledge with operational reality. She taught them how intelligence analysis saved lives, how pattern recognition under pressure required both technical skill and intuitive understanding, how the best analysts thought like operators because they understood the consequences of being wrong. Corporal DeSoto had become her informal teaching assistant, his enthusiasm infectious as he helped newer Marines grasp complex concepts. His force reconnaissance application was progressing through the evaluation process, and Reyna had provided a letter of recommendation that detailed his aptitude, dedication, and potential for special operations service. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne stopped by her classroom one afternoon, observing quietly from the back as she walked her students through a practical exercise in threat assessment. When the class ended and the Marines departed, he approached with evident satisfaction. "You are a natural instructor," he said. "The students respect you, learn from you, and push themselves harder because they do not want to disappoint you. That is the mark of excellent teaching." "They are good Marines," Reyna replied. "They just needed someone to show them how the pieces connect, how intelligence work is not just analysis, but operational art." Thorne smiled. "That perspective is exactly what was missing from our training programs. You're filling a gap that many people did not even realize existed." That evening, Reyna received a video call from Commander Rafferty. The SEAL commander appeared on her screen with the casual confidence of someone calling a respected colleague rather than reporting through formal channels. "Phantom, I wanted to give you an update," Rafferty said. "Your intelligence briefing directly contributed to mission success on 3 separate operations. The threat assessments you provided were accurate down to specific timing windows and approach vectors. Your analysis saved time, reduced risk, and enabled us to accomplish objectives with 0 friendly casualties." "Just doing my job, Commander," Reyna replied, though the satisfaction was evident in her voice. "It is more than that," Rafferty insisted. "You are proving what I have always believed, that the best intelligence professionals are those who understand operations from the inside. Your work matters, Staff Sergeant. Never doubt that." After the call ended, Reyna sat at her desk considering how far she had come in 3 weeks. The change was not just external, not just about how others saw her. Something inside had shifted as well. She had carried her transition from field operations to intelligence work like a wound, something to be endured rather than embraced. But now she understood that her service had not diminished. It had evolved into something equally valuable, perhaps even more impactful, because her experience could now benefit multiple teams across extended timelines. The challenge coins from the SEAL team sat prominently on her desk now, no longer hidden away. They served as reminders that worth was recognized by those who truly understood it, that respect came from demonstrated competence rather than self-promotion, and that the quiet professionals often contributed most significantly precisely because they focused on mission rather than recognition. Colonel Navarro summoned her late in the week for a private meeting. The facility commander had maintained regular contact since the revelations, ensuring that Reyna felt supported and valued. Today's meeting carried particular significance. "Staff Sergeant, I have received formal responses to several initiatives we launched after the inspection," the colonel began. "First, your nomination for the Defense Intelligence Agency Award has been accepted for consideration. The review board was impressed by your documented contributions and operational background." She paused, then continued with evident pleasure. "Second, the Special Operations Command has formally requested your assignment to their training cadre. I have reviewed the request with higher headquarters, and we are prepared to approve your transfer in 6 months as originally discussed." You will be promoted to gunnery sergeant effective upon your arrival at the Special Operations School. Reyna absorbed the information, the promotion representing not just increased rank, but formal recognition from the Marine Corps that her contributions warranted advancement despite her medical retirement from field operations. Third, Colonel Navarro said, I want you to know that the investigation into Burke and Sentinel Security Solutions has concluded. The company has been barred from future government contracts due to systemic failures in personnel vetting and training. Burke himself has been flagged in federal databases as unsuitable for security positions. The consequences for his actions will follow him professionally. The colonel leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. I tell you this not because I think you need revenge, but because you deserve to know that the system, however slowly, recognized the injustice and responded appropriately. You maintained your professionalism throughout, never seeking retribution, never using your background as a weapon. That restraint impressed everyone who observed it. Thank you, ma'am, Reyna said simply. As she left the colonel's office, Reyna passed the new security checkpoint where Gunnery Sergeant Pritchard maintained professional protocols with quiet efficiency. The contrast with Burke's tenure was stark, a reminder that leadership set the tone for organizational culture and that respect began with those in positions of authority. The weekend brought an unexpected visitor. One of the Marines she had saved during the explosion that ended her field career appeared at the facility gate, requesting permission to see her. When Reyna met him in the visitor center, he stood with his wife and 2 young children, a complete family that existed because of decisions made in microseconds under fire. Staff Sergeant Alvaro, the Marine, said, his voice thick with emotion, I wanted my family to meet you. I wanted them to know the person who gave me the chance to be their husband and father. His wife embraced Reyna with tears in her eyes, thanking her for a sacrifice that had rippled forward through time to create moments and memories that would never have existed otherwise. The children, too young to fully understand, nonetheless sensed the significance of the meeting. Reyna spent an hour with them, sharing a meal in the facility cafeteria where other Marines observed with quiet respect. This was why service mattered, not for recognition or advancement or personal glory, but for moments like this where sacrifice translated directly into preserved lives and protected futures. As the family departed, the Marine's wife turned back one final time. You gave us everything, she said simply. Everything we have, everything we are, exists because you were there when he needed you most. We will never forget that. The following week brought the first session of the quarterly coordination meeting that Commander Rafferty had mentioned. Intelligence professionals from multiple services gathered at a secure facility, and Reyna found herself instructing senior analysts and operators on integration techniques she had learned through hard experience. Her reputation had preceded her, and the students approached her lessons with the seriousness they deserved. During a break, a Navy intelligence officer approached her with a question that had clearly been building. Staff Sergeant, how do you maintain operational perspective when you're no longer conducting operations? How do you stay relevant? Reyna considered the question carefully, recognizing it came from someone facing similar transitions. You stay relevant by understanding that your value is not tied to your current physical capabilities, she replied. My hands cannot do everything they once did, but my mind has grown sharper through analysis. I cannot conduct field operations, but I can train those who will. I cannot be in the fight directly, but I can ensure those who have the best possible intelligence. Relevance comes from contribution, and there are many ways to contribute. The officer nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I needed to hear that. As the months progressed toward her transfer to the Special Operations School, Reyna reflected on her journey. She had arrived at this facility 6 months ago, carrying wounds both physical and psychological, uncertain whether her service still mattered now that she could no longer perform the mission she had trained for. Burke and his team had reinforced those doubts with daily harassment that questioned her worth and dismissed her contributions. But the truth had emerged, as truth always did eventually. Her worth had never depended on others' recognition. Her contributions had always mattered, regardless of whether they were acknowledged. And her service had continued to save lives even in this new form, through intelligence analysis that informed operations and training that prepared future operators. The quiet professionals rarely received public recognition, and that was acceptable because they served for reasons beyond glory. They served because the mission mattered, because lives depended on competence, because excellence was its own reward. Reyna had always been one of those quiet professionals, and she always would be. The call sign Phantom had been earned not through self-promotion, but through demonstrated capability under impossible conditions. That same capability now manifested differently, but remained equally vital to mission success. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or share if you have witnessed someone's hidden strength revealed in a powerful way. Perhaps you know someone who served quietly, whose contributions were only recognized when circumstances demanded their full capabilities. Those stories matter. Those sacrifices deserve acknowledgement, and those quiet professionals deserve our respect. 6 months from now, Reyna would begin a new chapter at the Special Operations School, training the next generation of intelligence professionals and operators. But today, she sat in her office reviewing threat assessments that would inform missions she would never see, protecting lives she would never meet, serving with the same dedication that had defined her entire career. The challenge coins on her desk caught the afternoon light, metal surfaces reflecting her scarred hands as she worked. Those scars told stories of sacrifice. Those coins told stories of recognition. Together, they represented a truth that Burke had never understood and never would. Real strength did not announce itself. Real capability did not require validation. Real service continued regardless of recognition, driven by commitment to something larger than personal glory. Reyna Alvaro, the Phantom of Force Reconnaissance, understood this truth completely. She had lived it, embodied it, and would continue demonstrating it for as long as she served. And that service, quiet and professional and absolutely essential, would continue until the day she finally hung up her uniform and passed the torch to those she had trained. But that day was not today. Today, there was work to do, missions to support, and lives to protect through the application of hard-earned expertise and unwavering dedication. So she returned to her analysis, her hands moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, her mind engaged in the operational art that she had mastered through sacrifice and service. The Phantom was still on mission, and that was exactly where she belonged.